Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining Gwinnett County Public Library in partnership with CPACS and Gwinnett Community Outreach for our celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month with CPACS. My name is Miriam Mayer and I work for Gwinnett County Public Library's Adult Services Department. Now I would like to introduce our moderator for tonight. We have the pleasure of partnering with Gwinnett Community Outreach, which promotes strategic communications and outreach with diverse constituencies and coordinates cultural events and programs to encourage and empower residents to be more informed and involved with Gwinnett County government. Representing Gwinnett Community Outreach is Sarah Park, who is the Community Engagement Coordinator and was previously Confidential Executive Assistant to District 1 Commissioner and International Marketing Coordinator with Explore Gwinnett. She is very active in the community, serving on several boards and maintaining a deep and sincere interest in building bridges between our communities and generations. Sarah earned her degree in political science at Georgia State University. She's also a graduate of Glance Gwinnett Leadership Georgia 2017 and has been accepted to the Leadership Gwinnett 2022. Please welcome Sarah Park.
Thank you for the kind and long introduction, Miriam. Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be speaking with you all tonight as a moderator. Before anything, I will turn the program over to Victoria Huynh and Ann Huynh. Ann Huynh is the Data Dissemination Specialist of the U.S. Census Bureau, and Victoria Huynh is the Vice President of Center for Pan Asian American Services. It's great to have you both. We all go back a long way as a community organizer. So I will start with our first question. Can you each briefly introduce yourself and your position with your respective agencies?
Yeah, thank you so much to the Gwinnett County Library and Gwinnett County Outreach team, Miriam and Sarah, for hosting this conversation. And I wish that we were at a different time where we could all meet in person, usually at an actual library or at a community location. But, you know, it's an honor to be part of this conversation and to share a little bit about our agency and the work that we do. But I am a proud child of Vietnamese refugee parents, you know, with a long history of, you know, living and working and, you know, being within the Asian American Pacific Islander communities or immigrant communities. AAPI Heritage Month, everyone. Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month is such an incredible month. You know, I think with everything that's been happening with COVID and since the March 16th shooting, you know, this is an even more impactful month for a lot of our Asian American communities all over the world, in the United States, and also here in Gwinnett County. And if you're not familiar with CPACS, we are in our 41st year of life in Georgia, serving the immigrant, refugee, and underprivileged communities. And our role is really to help uplift, support our communities through three buckets of services. And that's, you know, comprehensive health and social services, capacity building, ensuring our communities have tools, resources, and the connections to thrive. And then also the advocacy, right? We need to look at policy, look at all the barriers that may impact our communities from thriving in counties like Gwinnett County with the largest Asian American population. So I look forward to sharing a little bit more about who we are in our 200 staff, 17 different languages that we serve, primarily Asian languages, Spanish, and also East African dialects, and to really help, you know, support the 70,000 people that we serve each year, especially during times like COVID.
Now on to you, Ann.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you, Sarah, for the nice introduction and for having me on the program. Well, I have to say that we're not strangers to each other. We've been around and involved in many aspects of the community for a long time, and especially CPACS. When I first moved out here from upstate New York, I would quickly get engaged with BPSOS, and then later on learning about CPACS and then some other community organization. I got hooked right away. My background, I was an immigrant from Vietnam who came to United States back in the early 90s, 1992 to be exact. I went to school in New York, in upstate New York, and graduated from Cornell University. And then after that, I moved to the South to start a new life. But I'm glad that I'm here in the South, in Atlanta area, and to see the booming Asian population begin to see a lot more people moving in. And I remember Victoria and I had a conversation back then how we're going to increase more visibility, more the voice of Asian Americans in the area. If you're talking about Asian in general in United States, you're talking about either the West Coast or New York City. It seemed almost a disconnect to talk about Asian in the South, not even Asian in Atlanta area. But I think we have made big stride on this area in promoting, engaging the community with a larger community. And part of that, for my census part of it, was to engage them into participating in the 2020 census. That's where I come to get to know a lot more Asian organizations in the area. And then after the Decennial 2010 census was over, and then I moved on to then delivering the data and training and presentation back into the community, show them how to use it, how to whether they're working on a grant proposal, they're working on a community strategic planning, on a radio station, on a grocery store that are about to open. For example, that Saigon Farmer Market, when they opened the one down near CPACS on Milford Highway, they actually asked me to come down, drill up all the data as available, because they want to target Ukrainian, Russian, Mexican, Vietnamese, and Chinese, all. They want to be a market for all customers, just as a short example. So I've been involved with the community in that capacity in terms of providing data training and presentation, and continue to do so for years to come, and especially. So I have some data points to share and with you guys today and with the audience today, and hopefully preparing you for what to come coming from the 2020 census. Again, thank you for having me on the program.
Already, I'm looking forward to the slide and presentation going forward. Okay, so last year was especially challenging for everyone due to the COVID-19. How did your respective agencies continue your service to your community?
Yeah. And thank you, Sarah, for that question. And I think we can't really talk about where we are and what our future is without acknowledging what a really, busy, hectic, and hard year it was for the Asian American community. With the start of the pandemic, with our small business being impacted, our youth, kids in school, our elders, and all that's been happening with the increase in violence against the Asian American community nationally, and also us, witnessing what has transpired on March 16th when we lost 6 of our API, 8 of our community members because of a shooting, a senseless shooting, right? And we saw, a lot of these challenges bubble up in the news, right? What we've experienced working with our communities directly on the ground here. And it was, it's on part, we miss our communities, right? We went from, hundreds of our elders walking through our building and hundreds of youth and serving face to face, right here in our building, in our buses right there, to not being able to see our communities and our communities feeling lost, right? Where to get service, how to overcome this pandemic. And it's been challenging, but what I see, it was such a resilient community, right? Our communities have always been resilient. From coming and starting life here in the United States, right? Starting generations here, but also overcoming a lot of the challenges and our organizations coming together to create really beautiful coalitions, really beautiful partnerships to ensure that our communities are getting language access support, getting transportation support, getting emergency supplies, supporting businesses, small businesses, Asian businesses during this time of increased discrimination. And also, you know, hoping and dreaming still, right, for the betterment of our communities. And then with API Heritage Month, here we are in May, more busy than ever, but such a big interest in wanting to understand the diversity of our API community, and really recognizing that, you know, it's beyond visibility, that we're here in leadership roles, running for office, big voting blocks, really impacting the numbers and demographics of counties like Gwinnett.
Yeah, I think the COVID-19 really put a damper on our engagement with the community. But Victoria and I and some other community leaders were having a big plan. We're having a big plan to have the bus tour and a couple of really big statewide events, even regionally wide events that really engage AAPI community with the Decennial Census. And then we were on the TV program with just 1 week before the whole country got shut down. I'm glad that we got that TV program on, and it got broadcasted across the Vietnamese community. But it was part of our plan to reach out to Asian community across the state and the region. So that really put a damper on our effort to really promote and pushing it and really get the good count of the Asian population in the area. But it didn't deter us because we have a constitutional duty to complete the census. So we continue on. We got delayed a bit on the operation, but we've completed it. The result just came out last month. And it's important too that Victoria mentioned about the language access, and the Census Bureau is very aware of it, and then we put a lot of resource investment into this. For example, the 53 language assistants, Sarah knows about this too, that we put in place, making sure that everybody have access, understand what the census is, and then making sure they participate in. We hire bilingual, trilingual Asian workers, working for the Census Bureau. And the largest operation in peacetime United States, more than 500,000 people were hired just to conduct this. We're actually putting together a resource hub, including demographic, economics, data, put it all together in one place so that decision makers such as government agencies, schools, library, community organizations can use the data to make decisions. Like I told you earlier in the previous, before we started the session, whether a decision on open school, vaccine distribution. DeKalb County have reached out to me, for example, asking for data on disability, data on 65 years and over, data on Asian, and whether they have access to public transportation, what means of transportation they use, so that they put together the vaccine distribution plan. Even having a bus line, or whether to transport people to the vaccination site, for example. So the Census Bureau putting all the resources together. It's an 8 programs that include surveys, very quick experimental surveys, such as the household pulse survey, where we collect data on knowing whether the households are facing eviction, facing food scarcity, or even facing health insurance. And then lately we ask questions about whether people are going to be willing to take the vaccine and or not. So we include those data and then being updated weekly on census. I think that's something that the Census Bureau has contributed to our nationwide efforts to get rid of COVID-19.
Well, I'll definitely come back to you for detailed result on 2020. I'm sure everyone's waiting on it. So Victoria, what are some key services? I mean, I know CPACS offers so many services to our community, but what are some key services and program offered by CPACS to our community at large?
Yeah, and thanks, Sarah. I know with everything with COVID, we all had to pivot, right? Like any entity and agency, we really started enhancing a lot of our programs that directly did a lot of the services around COVID response, like COVID testing, now COVID vaccines, the emergency translations for a lot of the executive orders that happened right before COVID, translating a lot of documents and education pieces, and then gathering the protective, personal protective equipment, right, like masks, and doing mass dissemination of that. And those are just some of the programs that were lined up that were embedded in a lot of our programs. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So these are all of our services, and hopefully I think you see 12 in front of you there.
Yes.
And these are our core services that we provide literally every day, Monday through Friday. And CPACS has never closed, hasn't closed since the pandemic started. And that's something that we're very proud of, and that it really shows you how invested our staff are, right? Of, wanting to make sure that the communities have access to these vital services. But I'll just line up a few key here. The advocacy is so important, and it's just through these type of conversations of letting the community know that these services exist, right? And also talking to government, talking to businesses, talking to other sectors so that they know there's ways to cross-pollinate, right? To better support the mission of our communities, right? Supporting our communities. And then the health is really important, especially during this time of COVID, that we saw that there was a lack of support services or connections, and we saw that very clearly because of language, maybe, or just a lot of our communities didn't have direct access to health insurance and health care. And so that's why the birth of the Community Health Center right in Gwinnett County, it's called the Cosmo Community Health Center, has really been impactful in making sure that communities have access to, like a medical home, like a place that they can go for primary care and support and questions. And we saw the questions, whether they were patients or not, just go through the roof because people just wanted to call and speak to someone that spoke their language. And then I think another two that I wanted to narrow down is the senior services. We saw a lot of our elders were extremely isolated during COVID, being at risk and lacking transportation and several other resources. We were able to do emergency food deliveries and, have Korean meals, Chinese meals, right? And different meals and culturally, competent, like culturally specific foods, right? For Lunar New Year, for example, we had rice cakes for our seniors and making sure that our seniors felt, supported during this very difficult time. And translation interpretation. 17 different languages, that number keeps on growing. And in a place where Gwinnett is booming with the number of demographics, language spoken, countries, communities are from, it's just so important that we always, increase our community's abilities to get the information and the resources and the programs that are available. And so, and that's just a few programs, but just wanted to highlight a few of those that have been very important for us during this time of COVID.
Just to answer your question on what our agency, our bureau has done to help with the public, with or even government agency and organization, businesses to deal with COVID-19, we're actually putting together a composite of data from many. Oh, by the way, this is a joint effort among federal agency and private organization, business organizations as well, putting any data available here to help governments and businesses in making better decisions. So, for example, we quickly put together a business formation statistics. Believe it or not, we experienced startups happening during COVID year. But then, some business would then having hard time hiring people. So that business formation statistic collect data on startups, and then people then would learn through using our economic data, for example, to learn about what area, what industry, or what business activity should they get into, during the pandemic or post-pandemic. Data about community resilience, similar to the CDC Community Vulnerability Index, which is a composite of social economic characteristics putting together and sort of giving the community a score for whether people, the community, whether they're at risk or more vulnerable or stable in dealing with the pandemic. And weekly small business survey measuring the impact of the COVID on small businesses. And then the weekly household pulse survey measuring the impact of COVID on household. So this is what it looks like on census. And for example, if I click on, say, the household pulse survey, I will be be presented with an options to view it at the state level or at the metropolitan level. And then if you look at here, and you can select a variable to look at. So for example, here I select the metropolitan Atlanta, and then I click on the variable where it says receive COVID-19 vaccination. I want to see what's the rate of vaccination is like in Metro Atlanta. And I look at the chart to the right-hand side compared to the United States and then compared to some other metropolitans around the country. Okay, so you can look at it at the state, or you can look at the state level, for example. This time I'm going here to change my variable, and I want to look at the expected loss in employment, for example. And it's here, it shows 18% of Georgia population still expected, to age 19 and over, expected loss of employment. So that really goes into making decision about what, as I mentioned earlier, in unemployment insurance, how the state going to go about doing that, making that decision. Of course, these data is one of the many that factors that are going to be used to help them making that important decisions. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure data is still being compiled, but can you also share some result of the 2020 census? We all love numbers and we like all this visual slide, but we also like to know like these data for API community particularly, if you have.
Well, if you follow the news, we have just published the apportionment results coming from the 2020 census. Now, required by the Constitution. Now, if on a normal schedule, we would then submit that data by December 31st of the census year to the president for the purpose of apportionment. But this, because of the pandemic, we pushed it a few months back. So we just reported back on April 26th, past, I think, 2 weeks or so. And then the apportionment result is just the first product that coming out of the 2020 census. The next product would be redistricting. This is something also important for Georgia. And then the state going to get very detailed data about the result of 2020 census, even how many Asians, and that going to help them to redraw all the voting districts, school districts. We done this once every 10 years. This is very important for the community to understand about this process. And I talked with Victoria a little bit about this, just on the educational side of it. Make sure that we have at least some sort of educational material going out there, informing or educating about community about that redistricting process, what's involved and what's at stake, and how they as citizens can participate in the process. I thought that is something that in part of the empowerment goal that we are aiming to as we working with the AAPI community. So those are two data sets that we are expect to come. As far as how many Asian in Georgia or in Gwinnett County, that data set's not coming out yet. But I'm willing to give you another training and sort of preparing you on the program, which program you're going to look at, and what data tool you're going to be using, so that you can be able to access that data when it's coming out.
Oh, sounds wonderful.
Okay. And then you asking about what the landscape looks like for Gwinnett. Let me start out at large first, and we reported more than 331.4 million resident in the United States. And then we also publish a interactive data map where you can learn about the reassignment of congressional seats across the censuses. For example, the last census, 2010, Georgia gained 2 congressional seats and Florida gained 2. And this time around, Georgia, we didn't gain any congressional seat, but Florida picked up 1 more. So if you look at this graph, for example, those states that in orange are the states that lost congressional seats, at least 1. And then Texas gained 2 or more. I think Texas gained 3, right? So this is the interactive tool that we prepare for the public to learn about the census, of course, and then about our constitutional duty to report back to the president and then to the public about the result of the 2020 census. Here, look at the population map, and then I can zoom in and look at the Georgia data, and you can see that Georgia is close to 11 million people, and the population continue to grow at 10.6%, which is way above the national level, right? And so on and so forth. That's a piece of the Decennial Census result that just came out and that I'm happy to share with you. And more to come. Picture here. The Census Bureau also produce population projections, and part of that where we look at into the trends of the growth of Asian over the decades, and we put this report together where we reported by the year of 2060, we will be approaching 40 million Asian alone in the United States. By Asian alone, we mean people just check, say, for example, on the census form, if I check either Vietnamese and Asian, so I will be counted Vietnamese and or Asian alone. But then if I check Vietnamese, and I also identify with the Korean culture, and because my dad or my mom's side is from Korea, so I have an option to check more than 1 race on the census. So that gonna help us to understand about the data in combination, this is important for service agencies to know, because when it comes to serving the community, you want to get the total in combination. Yes. Those who say they are Asian alone, or also mixed Asian, Asian with mixed races. So, and we're looking at that, and then by 2060, we are projected close to 50 million Asian in this country. So that's the far ahead. But this is what it looks. Another trends going on, especially Gwinnett County is among 300 other counties across the country who are trending towards majority minority county. By that we mean, if you, for example, I pull up the data for Gwinnett County and you look at the red box here, and you see the white alone, 53%. But if you look at way below the very last line where it says white alone but not Hispanic, meaning that when you take the Hispanic white out of the white population, the white population in Gwinnett County is at 35.4%. That's below the 50%. That's what the phenomenon we call a majority minority county. So Gwinnett's been trending this way since 2000 census and 2010 census. Back in 2000 census, 67% of more than 67% of Gwinnett County was white, for example. Now we're looking at 53% alone, but when you remove the Hispanic white, we're looking at 35% white in Gwinnett County. That's another trend. And the Black and African American trending up to close to 30%. And look at the Asian, 12.5%. I remember back then 2010, and when we're going out doing outreach, it was about 10, 11%. So the Asian now making up I mean, by Asian, I'm not talking about Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander category.
Mm.
But anyway, we look at that about 12.5% in Gwinnett County. This is what the distribution looked like. I pulled up two maps, one from 2010 and then one from the 2019 American Community Survey, just to show you the distribution of Asian American population in Gwinnett County. Essentially, with 2010, you look back, it in the Doraville area, Chambly, that close to the Cap, and among Buford Highway, and among 85, right? And then now, if you look at 2019, it seems as if the Asian population begin to the shift more towards the northeast, northwest side of Gwinnett County. And look at, for example, this area here, I believe maybe on the others, around the Lawrenceville and more of Georgia or so, or up in that area, it's getting darker. The darker it is, the more density of Asian distribution is. So that's what it looks like right now, 2019. Now I can't wait for the 2020 census, the result to come out, and I'm going to map it. I'm going to show it to you in time to come. So breaking down that number, I get two more slides to show, and then that's going to wrap up the sort of your question about the landscape of Asian in Gwinnett County. If you break it down, again, if I'm looking at the 2019 American Community Survey estimates, for example, if I'm looking at Asian alone in Gwinnett, we're looking at more than 100,000. But look at the Asian in combination, we're talking about closing to more than 126,000 Asian in combination in Georgia. And here's the breakdown. And Asian Indian still the largest group, and followed by Korean and Vietnamese and Chinese, right? And this slide. So this slide shows Asian alone, right? But then we look at the Asian in combination, and pay attention to the Japanese and the Filipino too. Filipino at 2,700, and where's the Japanese at 1,600 alone. But when it combination category, I think that number is much bigger.
Yeah.
You see here. And the Filipinos come up to more than 5,000 Filipino alone. But in general, the Asian Indian still the largest group, followed by Korean group, and then Vietnamese group in Gwinnett County. That to answer your question about the Asian population landscape in the county.
And I'm just like always amazed to see the data, right, of the growth.
Yes.
And, like this trajectory and the tracking of the history of kind of how our Asian American community, how they exist, how we're growing, how we're, growing roots here in the South, compared to some of the other areas like the West Coast and East, and Northeast, where we've, seen a lot of our Asian American community exist. And so every time I hear on, report this data, and as we're doing all of our census work, I mean, it's just so important to recognize this is the history making, right, of our communities and how it's being tracked, and how these data sets are really impacting how our communities can thrive. Without the data, without the disaggregated data of the different ethnicities, it's really hard to kind of advocate for language, advocate for certain resources for certain communities, or understanding where our communities exist and where are they concentrated, especially in areas of Gwinnett. And so I think that data is really important, and I think our agency as CPACS wouldn't exist or wouldn't be able to thrive without the critical data that the Census Bureau collects, provides, and our community partners work so hard every 10 years, right, to gather this information to make sure that our families are completing the census.
And my job is to put that tool in your hands, and you know how to do it as well. Yeah.
We are always grateful, and thank you for filling in, Victoria. So as our community continues to grow, what is the key area, both of you, that continue to feel that needs to be addressed? How can your agency assist, and how can people reach out to connect with you?
Yeah, and so for the Center for Pan-Asian Community Services, I mean, just to see the census data. I mean, it's very apparent, right? We're like one of the fastest growing API community in the South, also in counties like Gwinnett County. There are, challenges, and, some things that we have to acknowledge is that, there's still a large percentage of our communities that are limited English proficient or speak English as a second language, right? And so when we're in moments of crisis, when we're in need of direct service and support, sometimes having that language vital documents in languages is critical for care in health centers, hospitals, schools, and other areas. And so I think that's something that we will continue to advocate for, especially in moments like pandemic, right? And we have to continue to celebrate our communities, right? Beyond May, 2021, it's also, June, July, August to the end of the year and so on. And we got to really acknowledge the contributions and continue to uplift the Asian American communities. And I'm saying that not only on these type of webinars or during May, but also in the boardroom, at schools, at government, nonprofits, businesses, in our neighborhood conversations, right? Making sure people are, we were talking about cultural competency, agility, yes, diversity and inclusion, but we really talk about how to be more welcoming, right? To our neighbors, to our coworkers, and really understanding that, the challenges of the Asian American community is something to discuss and the contributions to be celebrated. And you can reach us at, I'll put more information in the chat box as well, but, and it is at cpacs.org is our website. And you can also follow us on social media. We're pretty active with events, sharing different community events. And it's such an incredible month just to, to join and learn. And you can follow us at cpacs.org on most of our social media channels.
Then I have to say that the Census Bureau and federal government in general, I think, have recognized the contribution of Asian Americans, AAPIs, into United States, our culture, our science in the fields of culture, the arts, the science, and even sports. Right? We recognize that. I think they're more. The federal government, if you see that the past census, there are always efforts to hire more Asian to work for the Census Bureau, to have the people speaking familiar faces, speaking with the public, to gain public trust, because that's the core of our work. So moving forward, continue to utilize the services that we offer. For example, my service is always free of service, and Victoria's always reaching me all the time. I'm almost available every time she's reaching out to me. Take advantage of that, because I believe part of me being part of the Census Bureau because of that recognition, of the presence, and then the visibility that we've been talking about of Asian in the area, in the region. And then the Census Bureau and Mr. Grandy and the regional office, they're responding to it by engaging more Asian with the federal government with a program like this. And then from our end, I would encourage the public, the Asian community, continue to participate in surveys like this. The decennial is over, but the American community survey is still going on, and some other business surveys. The data are going to help a lot in terms of making decisions and plannings and so on and so forth.
So having this conversation every year, throughout the year, filling out survey throughout the year, that's our civic duty, as well as service that we can provide to the community. I can't agree with you both more anymore. So finally, what is that you hope to see from API community going forward, and engagement from our whole community in general?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think with the growth of our communities and leaders at all kind of stages, all generations coming together, I think my hope and I think I'm, increasingly more optimistic as, I see our communities respond to moments of crisis, has just been truly like life-changing to see where are communities who really thrive when we all come together and when our allies are with us, you know, especially after this, you know, during this incredible tough time for our communities. And the representation, right, to see our Asian American communities at so many critical places, at government, just like you, and also, you know, in government roles, running for office, and also taking the leap, right, to take on, you know, new challenges and recognition for our communities. We have so many firsts, right? First organization, first API organization, first API woman, first API man, first, you know, API LGBTQ, first Asian, you know, young person. And there's so many, and I really look forward to many more of those firsts. And hopefully we don't celebrate those first, but we celebrate the hundreds of yes, right? And so I think that's really incredible to be in this space, to see that all kind of unfolding in our communities in places like Gwinnett, right? Where people know Gwinnett as a large API hub for our communities in Georgia.
Victoria and I actually had a short conversation about this topic this morning, which is to continue our network of community leaders. We're talking about back then 2010 census, 38 Asian organizations coming together as a coalition to push the 2010 census forward. Back then, we didn't have any like Sarah at the Gwinnett County government. We didn't have, and look at that, where we are now. And so we do have really great AAPI leaders across the all sections of government and public and private and businesses. This important thing I wish moving forward is to continue to sustain that network, that coalition. And so the community coming together, I know there's a lot of agenda, a lot of things around, but focus on what's important for the community, what's the also focus on that civic engagement that we've been talking about for so long. And that's my wish.
Yes, I mean, thank you both. I mean, can't thank you both enough for all that you do. But for tonight, for great presentation, I hope you all enjoyed this wonderful session as much as I did. And just know that coming from my heart, I'm such a grateful that I get to work with these community members and leaders in a community, and we are very hopeful, right? So I'll take that in my mind, being optimistic, and we are here for permanent changes, and that will require us to work every day, not just at certain years or a certain time of the year. So with that, it was a pleasure to have you with us, and I'll pass it now to Miriam.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, I just want to thank you to Gwinnett Community Outreach for partnering with us. Thank you, Victoria from CPACS, and thank you, An from the Census Bureau. All the work that you do with the API community, it's wonderful and it's very welcomed. And thank you so much for everything that you have done in this past year, which has been a very difficult year for the API community. So we're very grateful to you for that. It has been wonderful to see Gwinnett County grow the API community, and it has been beautiful to have seen that in these past 20 years. So thank you again for this wonderful presentation. Thank you to everyone who attended, and we hope to see you soon.
Good night, all.
Thank you for having me. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.